Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Dan Nessel Show. I'm your host, Dan Nessel. Let me ask you something. Are you happy at work? Are you taking on whatever it is that you do with enough energy and enthusiasm? Or are you feeling spent and burnt out, like foggy-brained, unmotivated? It could be because of any number of reasons, but maybe it's because you're not taking proper care of yourself. You're not tuned into that combination of physical, social, mental health that sometimes we oversimplify as wellness. And I'm doing kind of those scare quotes around wellness for those listeners out there, because we're not doing video. But anyway, today I am really excited to explore wellness and what we can do about our own well-being with an expert in the field. My guest is a physician and practitioner of lifestyle medicine who shows busy, overextended professionals how to flourish by mastering their energy, weight, and hormones. She's a former plastic surgeon and now founder and CEO of Premier Wellness. Please welcome to the show the Thrive architect herself, in the flesh, Dr. Susan Lovelle. Dr. Susan.
Thank you so much, Dan. I'm so excited to be here for this conversation.
It's great to see you. I was just thinking about how we met, and my listeners will be familiar when I say the Connective, because the Connective is a great group of people, and obviously, Susan, you are evidence that we continue to get great people, and we met on the Connective a couple months back. Even after like a brief 5-minute conversation with Susan in one of our little breakout, virtual breakout rooms, like, oh, you got to be on the show. And the reason I thought you need to be on the show is because you've got this really fascinating story. Here you are, Dr. Susan, but it wasn't always thus. And, our journey takes us from Milan to Minsk. I don't know. That's a Seinfeld reference for those who are familiar with that. But it takes us all the way from Harlem to North Carolina and various and sundry places in between. So I was wondering if you could start off by, telling us, how did you get from the ballet to plastic surgery to lifestyle medicine?
Oh, I love this story. And it actually started even before dance. When I was 6 years old, I used to go to the doctor a lot. I used to have tonsillitis all the time. And if I didn't want to go to school, I would just say, my throat hurts. And it was always red. So I would go to the pediatrician. And because I saw him so frequently, I really fell in love with him, loved what he was doing. And I said, I want to be a doctor just like you, because I want to help other people feel better. This is at 6 years old. And he told me, absolutely, when you're ready to apply to medical school, you tell me and I'll write a letter for you. And 20 plus years later, he did. He wrote that letter for me. He remembered me and wrote it for me. So,
terrific.
Yeah.
That is a great story.
Yeah. But in between that 20 years was when I went into ballet. And I literally kind of fell into that mainly because Saturday mornings, I used to get up and watch TV cartoons all day long. And my mother said, this is not going on. We're not having it. So she said, you're going to do something Saturday mornings. We went up and started taking dance classes. And I found that I really loved it. And went from classes to becoming, going into a company, and then got the opportunity to join the Dance Theatre of Harlem as it was actually first beginning. We were there before it was the Dance Theatre of Harlem. And so, when I was going to college, it was a choice between going and sitting in a Bio 101 class or traveling the world. So what do you think, a teenager would choose, right?
Well, where did it take you if you're traveling the world?
Oh, my goodness. All around the United States, of course. The Caribbean, we went to Mexico, we went to Italy, which was one of my favorite places. And I actually took my family back there decades later because it was such one of my favorite places to go. Yugoslavia, when it was still Yugoslavia.
Mm-hmm.
Went to England multiple times, danced for the Queen Mother.
Wow.
The King of Norway. I mean, we were all over. It was wonderful. And, as a teenager, you could never get that experience. Absolutely never.
Not a chance. I was, I was lucky enough that my mom was a teacher. She's retired now, of course, but she was a teacher, and she used to run this thing called the Travel Club at school. And at the high school. And I went to the high school where my mother was a teacher. And, full disclosure, she did teach me my freshman year. My mom was my teacher. And I passed of my own merit. And I'll just put that out there to the universe. But she ran this club called the Travel Club. And every year she took a group of students. Sometimes I went along to England a couple of times, Ireland, Switzerland, and Italy. I remember Italy was fantastic. And
Did you just love it?
I did love it. Of course, I was just a teenager at the time. I don't think I appreciated much. I went back to Italy just a couple of years ago, and for business, but then stayed on for a little while longer and went around the Lake District with some friends of mine and my colleagues. And my goodness, now of course my wife's jealous. I was there for business, so getting back to the idea of wellness and life and lifestyle, I will need your services desperately if I don't take my wife to Italy at some point. Maybe even go back to your plastic surgery time, and I may need those services as well. We'll see. But I don't know. I owe my wife a serious trip to Europe and to Italy for sure. I loved it too, and it leaves a lasting impression. It's just I can't imagine how joyful it must have been for you dancing in all these places and in your formative years. So that took you through your teenage years then.
Through those teenage years.
Yeah.
And whenever I came back to the States, because I wanted to continue with college, that was the deal that I had to make with my mother to be able to go and travel, was that I would not forget my college courses. So I would come back, and whatever school had the courses that I need was where I went. So I graduated with 7 different undergraduate colleges.
Oh my goodness. You just like cobbled it together.
Cobbled it together.
Is your diploma like a quilt? Is it
Pretty much. And then eventually, when I was ready to apply to medical school, what had happened was, as you start to get older in dancing is a lot of fun. It's exciting. But as you get older, it starts to hurt a little bit more. It's not as comfortable as it used to be. And it's harder. It was more painful than there was pleasure. And that's when I started thinking, I said I was going to be a doctor when I was 6. Maybe this is what I need to start doing again. So I eventually applied to Columbia University in New York, got in. They were thrilled with this history that I had. Because I think that those couple of years, they were looking for people who weren't coming straight out of college.
Sure.
They were looking for people who had done something different with their lives. And I know that in my class, there was myself, who was a dancer. There was someone who had been in the Olympics. I mean, there were just people who had done major things.
Well, even more than that, though, what strikes me a little bit is that while you're dancing and cobbling together your undergraduate degree from 7 different schools, and maybe taking a couple years after that to get up to the point where you're ready to go to med school, somewhere in between that, you managed to accrue the credits necessary for like the equivalent of pre-med, and you managed to take your, not GREs, it's the
MCATs.
MCATs, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you managed to take your MCATs and all of that while dancing. And right? I mean,
exactly.
That's the part that kind of like actually amazes me about that, partly about that story. And it's kind of a foreshadowing, I think, of maybe the kind of grown-up you became after all that, just a touch of industriousness.
Just a little bit. People ask me all the time, like, what was harder? Was dancing harder? Was going to medical school? And I always say it was dancing.
Goodness.
I mean, by the time I got to medical school, it was a pleasure to be able to just sit there and study all day. That was the easy life. And so I came into med school with straight A's, from these 7 colleges. And I graduated from med school, what they called AOA, which is an honor society for medical students. So it was like the discipline that I learned from dancing, I just applied that to medicine.
Also, do you think that having done traveled the world and dance, I realize we're not necessarily digging into the main topic of wellness and well-being yet, but I guess it's all connected.
It's all connected.
Getting your, well, in a well-being and wellness sense, it's actually getting to the right mind space and getting to the right, mindset that you're ready to approach that next challenge. So, but putting yourself back in those days, I mean, do you think that because you had all those world traveling experiences, because you danced and did something unique that like only a handful of a handful of a handful of people ever do in their with their life. Did that make it easier in some ways when you got to med school? Like, you know what? I got nothing to prove. I'd done all that stuff.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I was past the age where it was so important to go out at night and go dancing or,
Mhm.
go bar hopping. I was okay. I'd done all of that. I'd done that in my teen years and early 20s. And so it was much simpler to just be a great student, be a good student. Yeah.
Wow.
What I will say, though, in those dancing years was that that's where I started with some of the habits that I think led to what happened to me later.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
As far as,
Mhm.
as far as running my body ragged, not eating well, really kind of feast or famine. I would starve myself during the week because you had to be about 100 pounds. Otherwise you were obese in your own mind. That air quotes on that one. That I saw later was what probably led to a lot of the issues that I had when I was further on in my plastics career.
Goodness. Well, we'll get back to that because
We'll get to those. Yeah. Yeah.
I was curious about that because they say ballet is a grueling career for sure, but a world like that whole world of dancers and dancing, and you just spoke about some of what I've heard, which is the pressure to maintain certain weight.
Mm-hmm.
That must play havoc on your system. So, yeah, I can't imagine that wouldn't have had some kind of influence on where you ended up, being practicing lifestyle medicine, moving from plastics to lifestyle medicine. Anyway, getting towards that, you graduate from medical school.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, why'd you decide then? Okay, first experience medicine from this wonderful doctor when I was a child, taking care of people, helping people. Okay, I'm going to go do facelifts. How did that happen? Now, by the way, I know that plastic surgery is not just that, right? There's a whole lot. It's reconstructive. There's a lot of things going on with plastic surgery. But for our edification, so how'd you choose plastic surgery, and why'd you go that route?
It actually makes sense because as I said, I wanted to help people, right? That was that primary thing. And when I went through my internal medicine, the family practice kind of rotations, what I saw was week after week, month after month, the same people were coming in with the same problems. They had diabetes, or they were overweight, or they had high blood pressure. We would give them a pill, they'd go away, and they'd come back exactly the same way the next month. And I just said, I can't do this for the rest of my life. That would drive me nuts to be able to do that. Then I rotated through general surgery where I'm seeing changes happening. And then I rotated through the subspecialty of plastics. And that was the exact opposite, where someone came in, they had a procedure done, and they went out completely different. And that's when I said, okay, I'm helping somebody transform their life. At that point, it was all external, but it was a wonderful thing to do because I actually saw the changes that I was making, and I was making people happier. It worked for 22 years, at least for me, until, then I started having my own issues, and we can get into that in just a bit.
Mm-hmm.
But that's when I started making the change back to let's help people really transform, not just on the outside. Let's help them transform on the inside. So it's really a full body, a full person transformation.
I mean, the pieces are starting to make perfect sense, right? So just thinking back to what you were sharing about your dancing career, how it sounded like it was so grueling. And I think it sounds like a lot of what was happening, during that part of your life, you were focused very much on the outside as well, right? Right?
Absolutely.
Like you're out there with how many people in the troupe?
Maybe about 25, 30 that we would travel, a lot with.
So 25 or 30 young women who are who are hyper focused on their weight and the way that they look, like together all the time for weeks and months at a time. What could possibly go wrong with that?
Oh, nothing.
I don't know. So it just occurred to me that, okay, it makes sense. This way you get to help people with the physical side of their issues, and make them happy. And that, that has a very, like, an interesting ring of authenticity to it, but it's like you don't think about people who are in plastic surgery necessarily in that way, right?
No, you think of it more as a cosmetic kind of
Yeah.
superficial way of managing things. And no, it's not necessarily.
Yeah. But I mean, I'm sure that you covered all of that during your 22 years in practicing as a plastic surgeon. You covered the gamut. But what made you think, like, what made you decide? So getting on in your career, you have a thriving practice. What made you decide then that, I don't think I want to do this anymore? What was the thing?
Okay. So you remember I was saying the dancing at some point, some of the things that I had picked up from dancing would show up later in my life.
Yeah.
And there are two things. One of them is that the show must always go on, right? No matter what was going on. I found out years afterwards that I had broken my toes.
Goodness.
I had broken toes and was dancing, and it hurt, but the show must go on. And so we did. This carried on into plastics where in spaces where I was the only plastic surgeon, there were a couple of times in my practice, I was the only plastic surgeon within an hour's distance. So I would see my patients during the day, I'd have surgery during the day, and then in the evenings and all throughout the night, if they had a plastics emergency, someone cut their face or had an injury on their fingers, I'm doing all of that as well. So I'm working sometimes around the clock, multiple days in a row, while I'm raising my kids and trying to be the best mom that I could be, because I didn't want them to suffer because of my choices. And when you said we're talking about, I had to laugh when you were saying that you had a year when your mom taught you.
Yeah.
Well, I had a year where I homeschooled my kids.
Oh. Wow. And you weren't even forced to do it, were you?
I wasn't, no.
Like many people were this past couple of years.
No. So, and they're still talking about it, decades later, they're still talking about the year mom homeschooled us, because I would bring them into the office. I'd, give them an assignment, throw them into my private office, go see patients, come back, check their stuff, go back.
Where were you living at this time? Where was
this? Was Northeast North Carolina. So it was in North Carolina by this time. We had left New York City. It was the year after 9/11.
Oh,
and,
yeah. Okay.
Yeah. We wanted small town, get away from the city as much as possible. A little bit of an overcorrection, but that's another story. Another story. So that's what happened. I found myself literally 24/7 doing all of these things. But I was also now in a town where, in New York, I had a habit of eating relatively healthy most of the time. In Northeast North Carolina, there was fried chicken and what we call swite Thai. And I literally gained 35 pounds. And I'm a short person. So 35 pounds on me is a lot. It's a lot.
It's a lot.
Between that, the overexertion, all of the stress of being on call 24/7, 365, I eventually ended up in the intensive care unit 3 times in the space of 1 year.
That's what do they call that? That's an inflection point, I suppose.
Yes.
Moments of clarity would ensue, I imagine. What happened?
Yes.
Was it
blood clots? So they, to this day, they don't know how they developed or why they developed. Have no clue. I know from what I know now that a lot of it was inflammation, fatigue, and 3 times. So 2 in my legs that went to my lungs.
Oh no!
And the third one just completely covered my whole lower torso. So that third time, I almost didn't make it back out. And that's when I said, you have got to change what you're doing. Mm-hmm. And at first, the only thing I could do was change what I was eating. I had no energy to do anything other than to eat a little bit better. That gave me some more energy. And then I started moving more because as a plastic surgeon, it was okay that I didn't work out because I was, working all day. So I started adding yoga, because I loved that part of it. It was very dance-like. Added yoga and qigong. Then I added stress management, looked at how I was sleeping, looked at my gut health, and essentially, piece by piece, put together what I take people through now in our programs. So learning how to eat elite, which is eating the right foods for you at this stage in your life. And that changes. What we can eat and what we should eat changes as we go through life. It's moving more, so it's not necessarily going to a gym, but it's moving all throughout your life. And we can talk a little bit about blue zones and how they realize it's not about exercise, it's about movement. Living wisely is your stress reduction, it's your hormones, it's your sleep. And then loving divinely is loving yourself enough to make the changes and stick with them that you need to be able to thrive. And then taking that love and spreading it to the people around you and to the world. So eat, move, live, love.
Eat, move, live, love. Can you repeat the actual phrases that you used? It was
eat elite. And yes, I know it's not grammatically correct, but I like it.
I like it.
So, but in other words, it's, I'm not saying eat caviar and champagne every night, but eat the things that are going to promote health in you specifically. And that differs for everyone. And one of the things that we tell people is if you're struggling with your health, the very first thing you should probably look at is what you're putting in your body.
Yeah.
And even if you think it's the right thing, it may not be the right thing for you right now. There are people who are just wed to, say, paleo or wed to veganism or wed to whatever. And if you're still struggling, maybe it's time to take a look at something else. And then the second one is move more. So moving throughout your day, just in what we do is something called Snacks Life Fitness. And it's just 1 to 3 minutes of movement all scattered throughout the day. So by the time you finish your day, you've had your 30 minutes of exercise without having to go to a gym. And studies are showing now that is just as, if not even more effective than doing longer periods in the gym and then sitting, in between.
For the rest of the day.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm going to interrupt you because you've just described like my whole, like everything, my day, essentially. I mean, I've learned a little over the last several years, but I always just think, okay, I'm going to bust my ass in the morning and do like 20, 30, 40 minutes, whatever it takes to really get moving. And then I'm like, okay, I have breakfast, chill, I'm done. And I can just the rest of the day I've earned my sitting, Now, of course, I have a standing desk and I try to move around. I do what I can, but even then it's not, even then I feel like when I have a good workout in the morning, I've hit my quota, but doesn't sound like that's exactly true.
Yeah, we're knowing more and more that is not enough. If anything, you can also almost counteract the good that you've done by sitting the rest of the day.
Yeah.
So
we're eat elite, we're move more,
live wisely.
Live wisely. Okay.
Yes. And so that is reducing your stress levels. That's huge because 75 to 90% of doctor's visits today are related to stress. If you look at that underlying reason. So stress reduction, sleeping, getting, 7 to 8 hours of sleep every night. That's another thing a lot of us tend not to do.
Yeah. So that's living wisely. Yeah.
Living wisely. And then loving divinely.
Loving divinely.
And loving divinely is loving yourself, then the loving those around you and loving the world, loving that connection that we all have.
So those 4 kind of zones or areas of kind of self-care, it looks like, or some things we need to think about.
Exactly.
So these are all things that that you have learned from your time, from your own experience. Clearly, you had some ultimately really, really bad health results from punishing yourself as a dancer, and then the stress and punishment of a hard career, and and then diet altogether. So you put it all together, and you come up with this with a system. Getting back to you left your practice of 22 years. Right. What was the evolution from there into, okay, I'm going to start my own business? Did you know that right away? Did you know, okay, I'm going to do?
I didn't.
Okay.
I didn't. As a matter of fact, I thought what I was going to do was just bring this lifestyle medicine into my plastics practice, teach them. So now they're good on the outside and the inside. And what I found was that the majority of plastic surgery patients, at least in my practice, weren't interested in something like that. They wanted the quick fix. They wanted their tummy tuck or their whatever that would have them, boom, change their body in that one surgery going forward. So that was one part. The other was that because it was so inside outside, it was so at two different ends of the spectrum, it was hard to keep them both up in the air at the same time. And eventually I knew that I wanted to do the lifestyle medicine. And so that's when I decided to move to North Carolina, back to North Carolina. Those 10 years I had been in Wichita, Kansas. So,
Oh, goodness. Okay,
yeah.
so there's a whole Kansas thing.
There's a
going
whole
on here.
Kansas
Okay.
thing.
Oh man, I have never been to Kansas, but I hear great things about the barbecue. Although you're in North Carolina, who wins? Come on, let's be honest. North Carolina versus Kansas barbecue.
I'm going to say
things.
Kansas City. I'm
Kansas
from New
City.
York. We did
Yeah.
more of the tomato based versus the vinegar based. I'm going to say
You're going to go with Kansas. Okay.
I'm
Well,
going with Kansas City.
yeah. Okay. Well, I do.
Don't tell them no.
Well, I do have a number of listeners in the Raleigh-Durham area.
Oh no, I'm in trouble now.
You're in trouble. But that's okay because
they're both good.
Well, yeah. I mean, in my visits to North Carolina, I'll take barbecue of any kind. But I'm sort of a fan of Texas style right now. To be honest with you. Love it.
That is true.
Which is not good for the health necessarily for the
No,
for the
none
wellness
of them
thing,
are.
is it?
None of them are. But it's all about moderation. You know.
Right. And that's another thing. So you devise a system. So you started the Premier Wellness.
Mm-hmm.
Did your consulting start before, like working with patients start before you started Premier Wellness then? Is that
Yes.
right?
Yes. So initially, like I said, it was part of my plastic surgery practice. And then eventually I realized that it just didn't mesh well. That's when I developed Premier Wellness and eventually just, separated completely.
Okay. So here you are, you've got Premier Wellness. You have a killer staff, I believe.
Oh, thank you.
We were speaking earlier, and Dr. Susan has made this a family business,
Mm-hmm.
is taken care of on the operational side by her son, who is her COO, and I think that's awesome.
It is.
So the two of you, and I suppose the rest of your staff run your business. Look, it's a time of, let's face it, we've been in crazy times, right? We've been in the middle of the pandemic and so on. And look, this episode will be released. Hopefully, we'll all be out and about. For most of us, but we're at the tail end, I think, right now as we record. It's February of 2022, and the effects of the pandemic, right? We've been talking about this on and off for a couple of years now, but clearly there's all of the medical side, right? There's the virus. Do you get the virus? How do you avoid the virus? Are we doing the right things with blah, blah, blah? But it's the long-term cost of isolation, the long-term cost of remote work, of whatever drinking habits and dietary habits have evolved during this time. I think we're a mess. And I'm really curious to learn your assessment of humanity at this point in time, or at least your corner of the world.
Wow, that is a question.
How are we doing?
Oh my goodness. Well, if you'd asked this question last year, I would say that I actually despair of where we were going. Just because I saw the world splintering, couldn't see how it was going to get back together again. I mean, as we start to go out and, do things together again, whether numbers go up or down, I think we're starting maybe to realize that we are one. We are one.
I hope so. Yeah.
We either rise together or we fall together. So hope we get that together. Right? Exactly. But it also reminds me of, and I said I was going to be mentioning this again, were the blue zones. Mm-hmm. And these are those areas in the world where people tend to live much longer than the average. And even though there's one in Japan, Okinawa, as a matter of fact, there's Sardinia, there's one in Costa Rica, there's one in Loma Linda, California.
Good. I didn't know that.
So the Seventh-day Adventists. And they have different ways that they eat, although most of them are mostly plant-based. They all do that movement. They don't exercise, they move throughout. But one of the biggest things they all have in common is that they all have community. They all have a purpose for living. And that's one of the things that pulls them through and makes their lives worth living. I think in Japan, I believe it's called ikigai. that
Ikigai,
whole
yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So it's something that you have to have if you want to live well. If you think about, the executives or people who work hard all throughout their lives, then they retire, and 2 months later they're gone.
Yeah.
Well, why? Because they have there's no reason for them to live anymore. That sort of thing. I'm hoping that that's one of the things that we'll see over the next year or so, us getting back together, getting that community back together, and getting our purpose back.
That's something that keeps coming up again and again, and across the different conversations I've been having. This idea of purpose, and certainly the idea of community and connection, right? And this couple of years, on the one hand, certainly from my own experience, I've lost so many connections. I haven't lost friendships. That's not what I mean. What I mean is, like, I just don't see people and I feel disconnected from them. Right? Now we've done interesting things to try to compensate for that. I'd certainly love to hear your thoughts on whether you think video is enough of a compensation or not. I'm in the camp that no, it's not. But look,
better than
nothing. Exactly. But we've tried, and we've actually created new kinds of communities over the last several years, and it's been a little bit of a crucible or like hyper accelerated experimentation in the way that we interact with one another. It's fascinating to see. That said, is it healthy or not? And have we lost track of our spiritual and physical health during this time because we've been hyper focused on a very peculiar aspect of that physical health, which is in many cases, overprotecting ourselves all the time, and just having that be forefront in our minds.
Forefront of everything, right? Exactly.
And by the way, I will let me just go back there for a second, because I don't want to say we're all overprotecting ourselves for no reason. That's not like the virus is real. It happens. It happened. It's still happening, and everybody needs to assess their risks and take precautions
exactly.
Accordingly. That said, as an aggregate, I think the argument is starting to be made more forcefully, but certainly can be made that a lot of folks went overboard, and our poor kids, like, just not being able to interact the way that they normally would, and for so long. Anyway, the where I was going is that we've really kind of taken a hit to our collective health, and how that affects community is coming back to what you were talking about. This, so the blue zones, these places where people live a long time. If community is the key, can we, where as a society now, how can we get that back? Like, what are the steps that, like, you can as an individual take to increase or to intensify or develop your sense of community, even in this disconnected world? What are you seeing in your clients, and what do you tell people to do?
I think the very first thing is being aware, being aware that we have lost this. And once you are aware, then you can take steps to make changes and be deliberate about what you're bringing back into your life. So, for instance, with my family, for those of us here in the Raleigh area, we always have Sunday night dinner. I think we missed maybe 3 or 4 nights in the last year over the course of the year. And what that is giving us time to get together, and we just laugh and eat and have fun. And for those who aren't in the town, we've started game nights. And so we'll spend, a couple of hours where we're playing games and laughing. And again, and yes, it is video, but we are also being able to connect. So it's really just about being deliberate and purposefully making connections when you can.
Have there been any? I know I just sort of went on a little bit of a mini rant or tirade about how we've all lost connection, but actually, have there been any in your minds and in among your patients and the people in your customers? Like, have there been any kind of surprising advances in the way that we connect with one another, or has there been any, like, really kind of positive benefits in some ways to the way we've had to reorient ourselves over the last couple of years?
I think the biggest thing is that because people are just craving that connection, I do classes every week, and prior to all of this, if it was, well, it's always optional. You don't have to come to the classes. But when we could meet in person, some would come, some wouldn't. But now that it's virtual and now this is the only time that most people are seeing anybody else in the group, most everyone comes to the classes, and so they're getting not only the information, but they're getting that inspiration and motivation from the whole group, which is, to me, it's actually probably more important than knowing, okay, if you eat this is going to happen, and that kind of stuff.
Those human connections, right? Just thinking about that, that rings so true. So my wife she teaches something called Music Together. It's a program for babies and kids ages like age 0 to 3 or 4, so.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a global program, and it's kind of, some people say it's like a mommy and me. That's the easiest way to kind of describe it to people. But and there's other things called kinder music and stuff like this. But basically it's teaching, little kids and their families how to be musical together. And it's the togetherness part that's really important. You're not going to teach a 1-year-old kid necessarily how to play the guitar, or that's not what she's doing. But by singing and dancing and in a very directed and methodical, technical way, and teaching certain moments during the hour that she teaches, it's a set curriculum and program. They find especially for early childhood development, it's really fantastic to get people to become musical who never were musical before. It's something that can be learned. Yeah, it's lovely.
That.
But where this ties into what you said is that she has this business of teaching families. It's a private educational institution. And when things changed a couple of years ago, when we went into lockdowns and all this kind of stuff, those are the businesses that really suffered. Nobody's going, like, parents taking little babies into these enclosed environments when we don't know anything.
Right.
Oh,
right.
man. So they took a big hit, and they decided, though, to do something really smart. Well, you know what? Let's just take those classes outside. And they were really scrappy and found certain locations in the area. And luckily, we live in a very rural type of an area. So there's parks and things around that, and yards and such. But teaching in the outside. But of course, when you're teaching outside, you're got to deal with weather, right? And more so, like, I'm in the north, so winter is winter.
It's going to be.
And I remember last year saying to my wife, okay, well, it's winter time. I suppose that we're not going to have any. You're not going to have any classes for the next couple of months. And they're like, no. There's demand. So she ended up teaching in the wintertime, and she's doing that right now again, because these families
just crave it.
Are craving the connection, valuing the learning, but they get to go out with their kids, and socialize and see what, show what it's like to actually be with other people. It can be like 20 degrees, 15 degrees out there. My wife, as long as it's double digits or above, she's out there. Yeah.
Wow.
And as long as it's not, and it's not snowing heavy or raining, she can't do it in the rain. And in the event of weather, then they do a Zoom, right? So there's always some way to make it happen. But these are hardcore, dedicated people, right? So at all levels of our society, I think that bears true, that we in these last couple of years have really, I think deep down, we know that this connection is extremely important.
It's key.
How do we cultivate that sense of belonging? How do we connect with others? So yeah, maybe it is that, okay, if I'm signing up for a class, I'm damn well going. Maybe that's one of the big kind of advantages of doing of this kind of stuff during the last couple of years,
Exactly.
But as we emerge, there's a lot of other problems I think people are still facing. What are you seeing among your clients and patients that are potentially the biggest obstacles to their wellness now, like the either residuals from the last couple of years or just things that have been exacerbated, or maybe new problems? Like, what are you seeing?
I would say the biggest thing that I'm seeing is the
Mm-hmm.
stress and anxiety. That has literally skyrocketed over the last couple of years. And, part of it's worry about, COVID. It's worry about finances. It's worried about keeping a job, moving a job. Do I want to stay? Do I want to go? What's happening with my kids? There's just so much stress. And more than anything else, I mean, the other things are kind of chugging along the way they always were. The women that I work with, for the most part, haven't seen, because you were mentioning earlier about alcohol and how there's a rise in
Yes.
that. And there definitely is nationally. Although, for whatever reason, I'm not seeing that quite so much. It's more the anxiety that's been, and burnout, the flip side of that.
We'll get to that in a second, but that's a big one. But and you're dealing primarily with women, Dr. Susan?
Primarily with women, professionals, business women.
Yeah.
Yeah. The me 10 years
okay.
ago.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Although what you're saying doesn't sound like it's designed. I mean, at least upon hearing it, that it's particularly focused on either gender, right? Like it sounds like all that can go anywhere.
No. Absolutely. Absolutely. And what tends to happen, I'm sorry, I don't interrupt, but what tends to happen is the wives do it, they get better, and then they bring their husbands along.
Yeah.
So, because they're not going to be cooking two sets of things, they're not going to be doing two sets of, and so the husbands get the benefit without having to cook.
Well, yeah, it's I can identify with that actually. But you just mentioned something another big word that I've been thinking about a lot is burnout, right? And I had a great guest on recently, Michael Lang, who was talking about he actually something that would interest you, I think, from your history. He's been a hedge funds and M&A guy, not hedge funds, but certainly an M&A guy, and been in he's been an investor and for a long time, and been in healthcare for a while. And he decided to just chuck it all. In other words, just stop the M&A business, and he has enough money. And now he's focusing on this big problem that he saw in his time in healthcare, which is nurse burnout, right? Nurses, crazy burnt out, especially now, right? But even before that, nurses are just overworked, overused, underappreciated. And go up and down the list. There's a lot of problems there, and he's using developing technology that helps to find little efficiencies during the day to help the patients and nurses interact better. And you'd be surprised. You cut off 30 seconds here, 30 seconds there. If you can stop a nurse from having to make 10 or 15 round trips to a patient, and instead give the patient the ability to help themselves and give the nurse the ability to process information once.
Exactly.
That changes the game, right? So anyway, that's just part of what he does. But point is, right, this burnout issue, and he was talking about it with nurses, but I think that it's widespread. So we've been working remotely. Now we're working partially in person. Some people are going back to in person. Some people are, so this hybrid work, right? And in the hybrid work environment, we've had a couple years to play with it. Now I'm fortunate in that I'm very accustomed to this. I've been in my last job, in my last company, and in my current company. So for over 5 or 6 years, I've already been working at home, been on airplanes, working at offices, this whole hybrid thing is not anything new to me. Mm-hmm. I still crave connection with people, but at least I understand this whole, kind of weird, partially at home, not at home. Okay. Where am I today? But anyways, people go back. A lot of folks, aren't accustomed to this. And, they just, when they're starting to get used to being remote, and most of them, at least seemingly not really liking it when it comes down to it. They like some of it, but they crave human connection. Going back to an office and starting up hybrid is going to bring with it a whole new set of issues. And for example, one of these things is there a new class system that's going to develop between people that go back to an office, people that are remote, and then people that are hybrid?
Exactly.
What is this is a whole new level of stress and things that you have to manage. And then I'm a manager of people. I have a team who are, some of them are remote, some of them are not. Again, I'm going to use the word fortunate because they're amazing people. And I don't think that any of them are going to have issues with this kind of a thing. but I have to kind of watch it. This hybrid work thing, it's going to bring its own set of issues. So, from your perspective, Dr. Susan, as people go back and kind of have to start up new habits or get disrupted again, what are the things that they really should be looking at, and what's going to be the biggest obstacles to their own health?
Well, I would say the one of the biggest things is that realization that they are stepping back into something that has not been for the last year or sometimes even 2 years. And as you were saying, there may actually be a little bit of a caste system, especially with the people who were in the office and stayed in the office the entire time, as opposed to the ones who were working at home, because it's already that, well, if you're home, you're not really working. Things
still there, yeah.
Kind of going on, still there, right? So that's one thing that's going on. But the other big thing that I'm seeing, and this is more with the corporate clients that I work with, where especially if they're global, they're now everything is Zoom or video or whatever, and just having a culture, not to use that hackneyed phrase, but a company culture that keeps them all motivated and happy and not stressed. So they'll ask me to come in and speak to how that can actually happen. How the steps that you actually go to make those things happen. It's got to be deliberate.
Yeah. What are some of the things that a company should do now? What are some of the things that they should look out for, and what are some things they can do?
I think one of the first things is for them, as like I say, I hate to always say to be aware, but one of the things I say is listen, let go, and live. So when you listen, you're listening to, I will sometimes say, listen to what your body's telling you, but it also applies to a company. So listen to what your employees are saying. Give them the opportunity to speak how they feel, and then have that there. And then if there's something that isn't working, then you let go of it. And so in a personal thing, it might be some food that's not working for you, or some relationship that is stressful to you, but to be able to let go and then live your own version of thriving means whatever works for you, and in a corporate setting, whatever works for the company is what's right for the company at that stage. So even though all the gurus and the experts may say you need to do X, Y, and Z, if your company wants to go A, B, and C and it works for you, then that's okay. That it's really a matter of tailoring everything to whatever specifically works for your group.
The idea of letting go, I think, might be the most difficult element of that, it sounds like.
Yes. Because we hold on to things, because sometimes it's because it's all we know. And we don't know that it can be better, but it's not until we let go that we have space for what can be better.
I mean, how much change can people tolerate, really, is the other thing, I mean.
Right.
Up at 2 years ago, they get just an email one day, you know what, take a couple things home. We're gonna just take a few things you need.
We take the weekend off, right?
We're gonna take a couple days. Take your laptop with you if you can. And then 700 days later, because that's what it has been as of this time. As of today, it's 700 days. Obviously, it's been different place to place, but still, there's this there. That's the idea that just changes keep happening is now a constant.
Exactly.
I can't believe I just said change is a constant. I'm sorry. I try to catch myself with these hackneyed phrases, but
But sometimes they're hackneyed because they're right.
Sometimes
there it is.
Sometimes we do. That comes out of history, right? But letting go things that aren't working is going to be a big thing. And you mentioned this Zoom situation and the Zoom culture. I felt I've experienced this time compression, right? So as a remote worker, people are conscious of the fact that nobody's looking over their shoulder, right? I think we're sort of getting over that now, but still, there's still probably plenty of people. And if there's nobody looking over your shoulder, how can you prove that you're actually working? And you feel like, oh gosh, maybe, or maybe in the middle of the day you're going and getting lunch, or you're doing the laundry or whatever it is you're doing. You feel like, oh crap, I'm not working. But the entire model has changed. Even if your company hasn't realized it's changed in that that standard industrial revolution 8-hour, block is no longer really a thing if you're working at home. I mean, in the service industry, sure, but or retail or whatever. But like, frankly, you have this different situation. So, in the middle of this, people I think have tended to fill their time with more work, especially meetings, right?
Yes.
So the Zoom. When I was in an office, if I had a schedule that was like back to back to back meetings, I'd be like, I can't do that. I'm not doing that. I got to, go to this meeting room, then go to that meeting room. I'm going to have to like go no, not doing it. But at home, you don't do that.
You got a break, but you don't do it on Zoom.
It's like Zoom to Zoom to Zoom. And I think it's more exhausting.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely.
So it's more important even then it's even more important that for you to develop a kind of a balance to your life or whatever that balance looks like. Maybe balance is the wrong word, but an approach to wellness and to physical and mental and spiritual health that works, right? So here's where we go to Dr. Susan, right? Let's bring it back to that central idea of wellness. If you had to define it real quick, like in one, because we've been talking about it a lot, but we've never really come back and said, okay, here's what wellness is. Or would you prefer well-being? I don't know I think wellness is probably your area, right?
Well, I say wellness, but well-being is probably a better word. Just because wellness has like we're saying, it's taken on so many other things, that it's supplements, it's wellness, what you're eating or whatever. It's more your well-being so that you are the absolute best that you can be at this particular stage in life. And that's physically, it's emotionally, it's mentally, it's everything all together.
So physically, emotionally, mentally, being the best that you can be at this stage of your life.
At this stage of your life.
It's going to vary. Exactly. There's no one size fits all.
It changes. And even at this, even for every, we'll just come up with a number. Every 50-year-old man or woman, if you put 10 in a row, they're all going to have different optimums. And that's right. That's the way it should be. And that's something that we need to be able to accept. The other thing, though, that I think we all need to accept is that as we're getting older, we don't have to accept that it's normal to have a lot of pain or to be tired or to gain a lot of weight or to have blood pressure issues. That's not the norm either. We can have that well-being that gives us that best as well.
Is this what you mean by being the Thrive architect?
That is exactly what I mean.
See where I went there? No, I've been meaning to ask you about that because first of all, I love it. The Thrive architect, that's you. And it's not just about achieving a balance or like being healthy, right? You can be healthy, I think, at least in my experience and just my little focus group of one here, it's like you can be healthy and then like fall off the wagon in 3 days and it's like you're back to being before you know it, there's 15 more pounds around your belly and you're like, crap, what happened? And it's easy to stop working out. It's easy to stop doing that. Whereas thriving implies something different to me, right? Thriving is like, now you're in a groove and you're growing and you're not just healthy, you're improving your health.
Yes.
Not just your physical health, your mental health, your spiritual, everything.
Everything all together. And just know, and that's something that we just had a talk with one of my groups because I think we all talk about falling off the wagon. I fell off the wagon with my diet or my exercise plan. And what I try to get them to understand is that it's not that. It's like there's a wave to everything. Everything has an ebbs and it flows. And there'll be times when you are way on top of your game and you feel great. That's when you're really in the zone. And there may be times when you're not doing quite so well as you would like. But that's okay too, because you know that your trajectory is always getting better. And if you look at it from that standpoint, then you're always on the right track. You've never fallen off the wagon.
Well, and you mentioned trajectory. Like, is it important to really measure what you're doing and be very almost, into the minutia, into the details of everything every day about the different things you're doing? Or, can you be a little loosey-goosey about it?
I'm more of the loosey-goosey type. And I say that because if you're, let's take calories, because that's one of the things that everybody likes to look at. I can only have 1,200 calories and it has to be this many carbs and this many macros. And what tends to happen is you get so focused on that you stop listening to, as I said before, what your body's trying to tell you. There may be, the body was made for feast and famine. That's the way it's supposed to do. And so if we're always doing the same things, our bodies start to accommodate to that and they stop responding the way they should. So, one of the things that I do and that I teach is to listen. If you're not hungry, then don't bother eating right then. It's okay. You're not going to starve if you miss a meal. But then the other thing is, if you are a little bit hungry and you want something more, then go on and have it at that particular stage. And then again, for the next meal, you listen back to your body again. And when you do that, you'll understand and actually hear, is this food right for me? Is this workout right for me? Is this sleep pattern right for me? And it changes.
You said something that sort of triggered something in my, not triggered me in like that kind of way, but that made me think of something. When you skip a meal or something, I mean, you hear about people doing like intermittent fasting, things like this.
Mm-hmm.
Of those types, like, that's sort of trendy these days. Any of those trends or diets or things that are out there that we should, that you think are kind of basically bullshit that we should avoid, right? Or that aren't good, that we should at least take a hard second look at. I don't want to put you on the spot to do that necessarily, but because look, as it's all connected to how much you perform at work, at home, with your family, and if you are like chasing down this path to lose weight because you think that I just need to get to a number, right? Maybe that's not the right thing for you. Maybe you have a different weight number than you think you have, or maybe you can't lose weight in the way that you're trying to, right? And you're chasing down, the wrong path that's going to just end up in disaster. So if everybody has to tailor themselves or has to find what works for them, are there some things that everybody should basically hold off on or avoid?
Stay away from. I would say stay away from the lemonade diet. I'm joking. I don't, unless, we're talking eating, candy bars every single day. I don't think there's really any one thing that you could say, don't ever do this. There's keto works for a great group of people. It doesn't work for another group. There are people who don't digest fat well. Well, guess what? Keto's not going to work for them, So it really depends on that individual and how their body works. For me, I intermittent fast quite frequently. My body likes it. There are other people where if they intermittent fast, especially in the beginning, if they're starting, their blood glucose is getting out of whack, they may drop precipitously and then they're not feeling well. So it's all a matter of knowing what your body, is built for. Some of that is genetics, maybe 20% of that's genetics, and about the other 80% is what we call epigenetics, the lifestyle, which is why we call it lifestyle medicine.
Makes a lot of sense, especially I just went on about 6 months ago. Yeah. I was on a work retreat, which was a wellness retreat. And we went to a medical facility and it was a full-on, we got a full-on physical evaluation, blood work. We got DEXA scan, the whole body fat scans. We did a VO2 max test to find out serious stuff that most people can't do.
They looked at everything.
And so when they look at everything, then, we meet with a dietitian who then, based on those, what type of body you have and all that stuff, has then kind of walked us through what might or might not work, what should work for you. And it turns out for years, I'd just been kind of doing it wrong, right? I mean, for me.
For you.
I've been doing it wrong.
Right. Exactly.
Or I've been doing it ineffectively, right? And I'm generally I'm not really an extreme of any kind. I mean, I'm not super thin, but I'm not really overweight either, but I could go that way easily. I could let myself go. But it's interesting because I realize that, the way that I'm eating and the way that whether I work out or not in the morning or in the afternoon. If I don't make it in the morning, fine, I'll do it in the afternoon. But if I don't work out that day or do something that day, then it makes my work suffer and my relationships suffer.
Absolutely.
Which is really key.
And that's something that I won't say that I'm struggling, but something that I really want to make clear. The reason I say that I'm the Thrive architect is because, yes, I'm going to start with your health and getting that better, that core health. But as you were saying, it affects everything else. How you feel, how your health is, affects your work. It affects your productivity. It affects your relationships if you're not feeling well. And so it's all a matter of all of these things together making you the best that you possibly can be. Yeah.
So, if you do all these things, then you can thrive. And you know what? Look, we're just about at the end of our time here, Susan. And
No!
well, look, I mean, I'm glad that we're sort of that the last bit we were talking about is a good segue into the fact that, look, if you really want to thrive and you want to have the energy that you need to do your work, to have these great relationships, you should check out Susan's book.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
Right. Susan wrote a book. It's available on her website. It's available on Amazon. Thrive, exclamation point. So Thrive.
That's Thrive.
The 5-week guide to mastering your energy. And it's available on Amazon and your website. Can you give like a top line, like 2-sentence, 3-sentence summary of what people can find in the book, Susan?
Yeah. So we go through those 4 weeks: eat, move, live, love. And then the last week is listen, let go, and live.
Oh, what we talked about.
And so I'm giving you, so we talked about all of that. And the reason I wrote the book was because I had a course that we took people through over 5 weeks. And not everyone could work with me. So I said, let me put this in book form. This way, if you want to do it on your own, it's right there, step by step.
Awesome. And you can get that on Amazon. You can get it on Susan's website, which is premierwellness.com. And that's premier with an E, Premiere, wellness.com. And you can reach Susan there. You can certainly get in touch with her there. You can find Susan on LinkedIn, and her name will be spelled properly in the episode title. And but if you look for a Dr. Susan Lovelle or even the Thrive Architect, there's nobody else. You'll find her for sure. Check out the book, check out the website. If you want to work with Susan or find out more about the courses she offers, again, the website's a great place to go. Is there any place else people should look, Susan, for that? LinkedIn.
LinkedIn. Yeah. Those are the two big ones.
LinkedIn and the website. Yeah. So perfect. We got you all covered. Any last words, Susan, do you want to leave us with before we move on to our own wellness journeys?
I would just say to remember that your body knows exactly what it needs at this stage in life. So just follow its lead.
Excellent advice. I keep trying to listen to my body. It's telling me, maybe it's time to crack open the bourbon bottle, but I don't think it's been a long day. I was explaining to Susan, by the way, earlier that I'm a father of, as my listeners know, I have two teenage girls, and that there should be enough to let everybody know that sometimes a little glass on the rocks is a nice way to end the day. But in moderation, that's it. We don't do anything.
Everything in moderation. Crazy. Even moderation.
Even moderation in moderation. That's good to know. Dr. Susan Lovelle, it has been a privilege and a pleasure to speak with you and to spend time with you. And really, I'm looking forward to getting to know you better and to speak with you again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure.